A day still looks like any other day. The same rhythm, the same routines, and yet, somewhere within you, something is shifting, very gently. Not a big change that others would easily notice, but the way you begin to see things slows down, just a little. The way you listen to a conversation lingers just a little longer, and some old emotions don't seem to reach you the way they used to. Aquarius has always carried a private inner world, a space not everyone gets to enter. But lately, that space feels different. It's not that you're trying to open the door. It's more like something inside you is quietly loosening on its own. You don't feel the need to search so much anymore. You don't feel the need to explain who you are, just a passing feeling that something is slowly falling into place. And maybe the most noticeable shift isn't what's happening around you, but how you're beginning to feel yourself again, familiar, yet somehow new, close, yet deeper than before. So, if this feeling isn't just random, then what is it that's really opening within you right now? Some changes in life don't arrive with noise. They don't come through a clear event or carry the feeling of, this is an important moment. They simply appear quietly, like a soft breeze passing by, just enough for you to feel it, but not enough to name it. Aquarius, you may have moved through the past few days with a slightly different feeling, one that's hard to explain. Everything on the outside seems the same. Work, routines, familiar conversations. But inside, there's a space somewhere that no longer reacts the way it used to. You don't rush to respond when something bothers you. You don't feel the need to prove you're right in small disagreements. And you're no longer pulled too far by emotions that once felt so familiar. It's not that you've become cold. It's more like you've taken a step back, just enough to see more clearly, just enough not to be carried away like before. And this, at first glance, may seem very small, but sometimes the most meaningful changes in life begin exactly like this. Not by changing your whole life overnight, but by changing the way you exist within your life. You might notice it in a very ordinary moment, a morning when light touches a familiar room, but you linger there a little longer. A conversation that isn't particularly special, but you listen a little deeper, or simply a quiet pause, where you do nothing at all and still feel enough. Moments like these don't try to impress you. They don't announce everything is changing. They just sit there, waiting for you to notice. And maybe what feels most confusing isn't the change itself, but the fact that you can't quite name it yet. You might ask yourself, am I becoming different? Or is it just a kind of tiredness or a temporary phase I'm moving through? The answer may not need to be clear right now, because not every inner movement needs to be understood immediately. Some things are meant to be felt first, and only later, slowly understood. And if you allow yourself not to rush into explanations, you may begin to notice something more subtle, that a part of you is quietly readjusting. No pressure, no force, just gently moving toward a state that fits you better. Like walking into a room where no one says anything, yet you can still feel that the air is easier to breathe. Not because something special happened, but because you are in the right place at the right moment, in the right state of being. And maybe what's opening within you right now feels something like that. Not a wide door you can clearly see, but a small opening, just enough for light to pass through. Just enough for you to begin seeing things differently, even if only slightly. And if you stay with it long enough, without rushing to define it, without trying to control it, you may start to realize that what truly matters isn't how much you've changed, but when you began to feel differently. And sometimes a very subtle shift in the way you feel is enough to open an entirely new direction. Not all at once, but enough for you to keep moving forward in a different way. And maybe what's worth exploring next isn't what's changing around you, but why you no longer feel the need to try so hard to belong. Aquarius isn't the kind of person who easily fits into any mold. You've known that, probably from very early on. There were times when you paid close attention to how other people spoke, how they reacted, how they seemed to fit within a group. And then, you tried adjusting yourself just a little. Not to lose who you are, but simply to make things feel easier. You said just enough. You held back the parts of you that felt too different. You learned how to make things look okay on the surface. even when something inside didn't quite align. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just a way to move through the world with less friction. But somewhere along the way, maybe not long ago, you started to feel tired of constantly adjusting, not physically exhausted, but a quiet, deeper kind of tired, like you no longer wanted to shrink yourself just to fit into a space. And what's interesting is, this shift didn't come from a bold decision. You didn't stand up and say, "From now on, I'll be different." It came more naturally than that. You simply stopped feeling the need to do things the old way. You began speaking a little more honestly. You stayed quiet when you didn't feel like explaining. You stepped away from conversations that no longer felt like connection. No resistance. No need to prove anything. Just a very gentle choice to stay with what feels right and not force yourself into what no longer does. And from the outside, it might look like you're pulling away. Saying less, showing up less, trying less to fit in. But inside, the experience is completely different. This isn't separation. It's a return to your own rhythm, a return to the way you feel the world, without filtering it through someone else. Like when you stop turning the dial trying to catch someone else's signal. And finally, you let it rest on your own frequency. And when that happens, something subtle begins to shift. You're no longer trying to find your place, because you begin to realize that your place that was never about fitting in with someone else. It's about how honest you are with yourself. And when that honesty becomes clear enough, quiet enough, steady enough, you start to notice something almost unexpected. The people, the situations, the spaces around you begin to shift, not all at once, not in an obvious way. Just what no longer resonates slowly fades back, and what feels more aligned begins to appear, gently. No noise, no need to announce itself, but enough for you to feel. You no longer have to try to belong. And maybe what matters most here isn't that you stop trying, but what begins to show up when you allow yourself to stay in your own frequency. Because the moment you stop trying to blend in, real connection has a way of finding you in a completely different way. And then, when you stop trying to blend in, something very different begins to appear. Not loud relationships, not connections that arrive fast, strong, and obvious, but encounters that feel very light. You may not even remember exactly when they began, just a random conversation, a glance that lingers a little longer than usual, or a simple sentence that stays with you longer than you expected. These people aren't trying to impress you. They don't feel the need to prove anything, and neither do you. There's no pressure to keep the conversation going, no urge to fill every silence. In fact, there are moments when two people simply share the same space, and somehow, that already feels like enough. This is a different kind of connection, not built on intensity, but on ease, like walking into a room and not needing to adjust yourself at all, and still feeling like you belong there. And what's interesting is, these connections don't always last long in the usual sense. They can be brief, a few minutes, a few messages, but somehow, they reach you more deeply. You don't replay what you said. You don't analyze what the other person meant. There's just a quiet clarity that everything unfolded naturally, and maybe, after the moment passes, you return to your life, but carry with you a very subtle warmth, not strong enough to change your entire day, but enough to remind you that connection doesn't have to be complicated to be real. You begin to notice that you're no longer drawn to relationships that require effort just to hold together, no longer pulled into spaces where you have to speak more than you feel or perform more than you truly are. Instead, you find yourself leaning toward places where you can simply breathe, where silence isn't something to fix, but something that belongs naturally to the moment. And in those spaces, a very quiet awareness begins to form, that maybe you were never truly out of place the way you once thought. Maybe you just weren't in the right space yet. You hadn't met the right frequency. You hadn't allowed yourself to be still enough to recognize what actually fits. And as you begin to slow down, to be more honest with yourself, to try less to become a more acceptable version, these connections seem to become clearer, not because they suddenly appeared, but because you're finally able to notice them, like a frequency that was always there, but you hadn't tuned in to hear it. And now, as you settle into your own rhythm, everything feels clearer. People come and go, but they no longer leave behind the same emptiness as before, because you're no longer looking to be filled by them. You simply meet, connect, and allow things to unfold as they are. No holding on, no rushing to define, just feeling. And within that simplicity, something deeper begins to reveal itself, that when you stop trying to create connection, you begin to touch real connection, the kind that doesn't need to be defined right away, doesn't need to be secured right away, yet still feels like being understood in a way that's entirely your own. And maybe what's worth noticing next isn't who you're meeting, but what is slowly changing inside you as these connections appear. A new inner space, quiet, real, beginning to take shape. And as those gentle connections begin to appear, you slowly start to realize something deeper. It's not the world around you changing first, it's the way you hold that world that has shifted. Aquarius has always carried a vast inner world, filled with thoughts, layers of emotion, and questions not everyone can understand. Before, you may have carried quite a lot within it, things left unsaid, moments you tried to make sense of, feelings you held on to, because you didn't know where else to place them. But lately there's been a quiet kind of clearing taking place. Not forceful, not sudden. Not about cutting everything off all at once, but something much more natural. You begin to notice you don't want to carry so much anymore. Not because you've become weaker, but because it no longer feels necessary to hold on to everything. Thoughts that used to return every single day start to come less often. Emotions that once pulled you far away now pass through and settle just enough. You still feel everything, but you're no longer carried by everything. It's like standing in the middle of a moving current, but no longer being pushed by it the way you once were. And right there, a kind of space begins to open. At first, that space may feel unfamiliar, because you were used to always having something happening inside. Always a thought, always a feeling, always something to figure out. But now, there are moments when you're simply there. No need to analyze, no need to react right away, no need to search for an answer, just a quiet state of being. And what's interesting is that quiet isn't empty. It's full of presence, full of clarity, full of a very light feeling. As if you finally have enough space to breathe, you begin to appreciate these quiet moments more than before. Not because you want to disconnect from the world, but because you realize it's in these spaces that you understand yourself most clearly. The things that once weighed on you don't disappear completely. They just no longer take up the same space. You don't hold everything at the same level of importance anymore. You begin to sense what truly deserves your energy and what can simply pass through. This isn't indifference. This isn't you stopping caring. It's a quiet kind of maturity, knowing you don't have to react to everything. And when your energy is no longer scattered in every direction, something else begins to happen. What truly matters becomes clearer. No need to search for it. No need to force understanding. It rises on its own. Like something that belongs to you always knows how to find its way back. And this quiet process of clearing is creating a new space within you. A space that isn't too full, but enough. Not loud, but alive. Not perfect, but real. Like opening the door to a room that had always been closed. The light doesn't rush in all at once, but slowly, things begin to come into view. You start to see what's actually there, not through urgency, but through presence. And maybe what matters next isn't how much you've let go, but the new feeling that's quietly forming as you remain in that space, a feeling where you don't have to hold yourself tight anymore. You can simply be there and be yourself. And as that inner space begins to open wider within you, a new understanding slowly starts to take shape about what it really means to belong. Before, when you thought about that, you may have imagined a specific place, a city, a home, a group of people you could easily blend into. But the deeper you go into yourself, the more you begin to realize that the feeling of belonging isn't tied to a fixed location. It's not something you can point to on a map, and it's not something you find just by moving from one place to another. It appears when something inside you becomes quieter, when you no longer feel the need to adjust yourself to fit the space around you, when you no longer feel you have to explain why you think the way you do, why you feel the way you feel. And what's most interesting is, this feeling doesn't come from everything becoming perfect. It's not about being fully understood. It's not about always being in a comfortable environment. It's something more personal than that. You're there, and you don't have to shrink yourself anymore. You don't have to say more to be accepted. You don't have to stay quiet just to avoid being misunderstood. You simply exist, and that is enough. You might notice this feeling in very ordinary moments, an afternoon where nothing special is happening, but something inside you feels lighter, a conversation where you don't search for the perfect words and still feel heard, or even when you're alone, with no one around, and yet you don't feel empty. These moments don't try to impress you. They don't make you stop and say, "This is it, I've found it." They simply arrive and stay just long enough for you to notice something subtle, that maybe belonging isn't something you achieve. It's something you slowly allow yourself to feel, like when you stop searching for a destination and begin to realize that what you were looking for has been appearing in spaces much closer than you thought. Not always clear, not always lasting, but each time it shows up, you understand a little more about how you want to live, how you want to connect, and how you want to remain within a space. And maybe what changes you the most isn't that you've found the right place, but that you no longer force yourself to stay where it no longer feels right. You begin to leave earlier, not because something is wrong, but because you recognize you deserve a different state of being. You choose to stay longer, not out of fear of losing it, but because you genuinely feel at ease. These choices are small, quiet, but over time, they reshape the entire way you move through life. And one day, you may not need to ask anymore, "Where do I belong?" Because in the way you enter a space, the way you stay, the way you leave, the answer is already there. And maybe what's worth listening to next isn't where you are, but the subtle signs showing you that you've already begun to recognize that feeling through moments that seem ordinary, yet carry a very deep kind of confirmation. And then, when you stop trying to name everything, the signs begin to appear in a very different way. Not as big events, not as moments that make you pause and say, "This is exactly what I've been waiting for," but as very small details, arriving and fading so light that if you're not still enough, you might miss them. An afternoon that moves a little slower than usual. The light isn't anything special, and yet it makes you want to stay just a little longer. You're not doing anything important. You're not achieving anything big. And still, there's a quiet feeling that everything is enough. A short conversation. Not long, not filled with memorable lines. But when it ends, you don't feel empty. You don't replay it in your mind. You don't analyze what the other person meant. There's just a quiet clarity that you were truly there and so were they. Or maybe it's a very private moment when you're alone, no noise, no one to interact with, nothing to fill the space. And this time, the silence doesn't make you uncomfortable. It doesn't bring loneliness. It doesn't push you to find something to fill it. It's simply an open space, and you're in it naturally. Moments like these don't try to prove anything. They don't tell you that your life has changed. They don't promise that things will get better. They just arrive, like a gentle reminder that you're more in rhythm with yourself than before. And as these small details begin to repeat, not in a clear pattern, but enough for you to notice, something has shifted. You're no longer searching for a sense of rightness in big things, no longer waiting for a clear sign to confirm you're on the right path. Instead, you begin to trust what is subtle, a light feeling in your chest, a comfort that doesn't need a reason, a moment where you don't have to be anyone else. And these seemingly small things slowly become a new kind of compass, not to lead you to a specific destination, but to help you recognize when you're closer to yourself. And maybe the biggest shift isn't in what you achieve, but in how you begin to notice what has always been there, a sense of enough, a quiet state, a presence that doesn't need to be explained. And as you allow yourself to stay with these moments without rushing to define them, without trying to hold on to them, you may begin to see something more clearly. That belonging isn't something you have to search for somewhere farther away. It's not ahead of you. It's not tied to a goal you have to reach. It begins to appear in the way you feel each moment, in the way you remain in an ordinary afternoon, in the way you listen without needing to respond right away, in the way you allow yourself to be enough, without needing anything more. And as this becomes more familiar, another question quietly begins to rise. If you no longer need to search for that place, then how might the way you move forward from here begin to change? And as you begin to realize that you no longer need to search for that place, another subtle shift starts to unfold. The way you move through life no longer feels the same. Before, you may have been used to always looking ahead, always thinking you needed to move a little faster, achieve a little more, become a better version of yourself by some standard you were trying to reach. You set milestones, you made plans, you followed paths you believed would take you where you needed to go. And none of that was wrong. It was part of the journey, but at some point, something began to feel slightly out of place. Not that you lost motivation, not that you stopped caring about your future, just the way you approach things began to change. You no longer felt the need to rush the way you used to. That quiet pressure, the one that kept telling you to move faster so you wouldn't fall behind, no longer held the same weight. Instead, there's a kind of slowing down that feels natural, not stopping, but beginning to move in your own rhythm. You allow yourself to stay longer in moments that matter. You no longer pass through everything just to reach a destination. You begin to listen more, not only to others, but to your own inner sense. There are days when you don't do as much as before, yet somehow you feel fuller. There are moments when you don't move forward in the usual sense, but you understand more clearly where you're going. And what's interesting is, when you stop trying to force everything to happen faster, things begin to come to you in a different way. Not all at once, not overwhelming, but more in time. You meet someone when you're actually ready to understand them. You notice an opportunity when you're calm enough not to rush into it or turn away from it. You make a decision, not out of fear of losing something, but because it genuinely feels right. It's like you stop chasing the current and begin to move with it, with awareness, not giving up, but trusting that you don't need to control everything to stay on your path. And within this shift, a very different feeling begins to form. You no longer measure your journey by speed alone. You begin to notice the quality of each step, the way you feel while you're in it, the way you show up for what's happening. You start to realize moving faster doesn't always mean getting closer, and slowing down doesn't mean you're falling behind. It may simply mean you're moving in a different rhythm, a rhythm that isn't easy to see from the outside, but feels very clear from within. And when you trust that rhythm enough, you no longer feel the need to compare yourself to anyone else, no longer feel the need to ask, have I gone far enough? Because you begin to understand that each step you take, if it feels true to you, then it's already enough. And maybe what surprises you most isn't that you've slowed down, but what begins to move closer to you once you stop chasing. Things that feel more aligned, connections that feel clearer, opportunities that don't require you to compete for them. Not because you were chosen, but because you were already in the right place to recognize them. And maybe the question now isn't how fast you'll go, but as you continue to walk in your own rhythm, what will slowly become clearer along the path you're already on. And then, when you look back at this entire journey, you may begin to notice something very different from what you once expected. You didn't arrive in the way you thought you would. There wasn't a clear moment where you could say, "This is it, I've made it." Your life may still hold unfinished pieces, questions without answers, paths that are still unfolding, and yet, the feeling inside you is no longer the same. It's no longer that constant sense of searching, no longer that feeling of standing outside everything, looking in, wondering if you truly belong somewhere. Instead, there's a very subtle shift, but a very real one. You begin to feel like you are inside your own life, not standing outside of it anymore. You begin to notice that connection doesn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. You begin to see that emotion doesn't have to be intense to be true, and you begin to realize that the smallest moments are often where you feel most clearly that you are exactly where you need to be. They don't always last, they're not always obvious, but each time they appear, they carry a quiet kind of peace. The kind you don't need to hold on to and don't feel afraid of losing. And maybe what matters most isn't where you've found your sense of belonging, but how you've begun to understand that it was never tied to a distant destination. It's not about everything becoming perfect. It's not about becoming someone else. It lives in the way you show up, in the way you choose to stay with what feels real, in the way you allow yourself to stop holding everything so tightly, like walking into a space. And for the first time, you don't ask yourself if you fit there. You simply are there, and that is enough. Your journey may still be unfolding. There may still be parts you don't fully see yet. But now, you're no longer moving forward with a sense of lack. You're moving with a quiet kind of fullness, not full in every way, but full enough that you no longer feel the need to search so urgently. And if there's anything to hold on to from this entire journey, maybe it's this. You don't need to go somewhere else to feel that you belong. You only need to go deep enough within yourself to realize that this feeling has been forming for a long time, little by little, softly, real. And if you find yourself somewhere along this path, you may have already felt these quiet shifts. No need to understand everything all at once. No need to name it right away. Just keep listening to how you feel, how you respond, how you choose to stay or to leave. Because sometimes the most important things in life don't come for you to find. They come for you to recognize when you become still enough to see them. And maybe, in this very moment, as you're listening to these words, you're already closer to your sense of belonging than you ever realized.